Hello everyone, welcome to Dark Fears family. Tonight, we step into the shadows of the Pacific Northwest, where the trees whisper secrets no one dares to repeat. Imagine hiking through a foggy forest at dusk, noticing footprints that aren't yours, leading deeper into darkness. Every snap of a branch, every rustle, feels like eyes watching. You stop, your breath freezes, something follows, but when you turn, nothing's there. Tonight, we dive into 7 creepy tales from the mysterious forests of the Pacific Northwest. Real people, real encounters, shadowy figures, whispers in the trees, and horrors that will leave you questioning the safety of even the quietest trail. Not every secret reveals itself. Some watch, waiting. So, Dark Fears family, if you're brave, subscribe, hit the bell, and prepare yourself, because the forests are waiting. My name is Daniel, and this happened when I decided to go on a solo hike in the Hoh rainforest of Washington. I had always loved the forest, the smell of damp earth, the towering cedar trees, the serenity. But that day, serenity was the last thing I would find. It began with a trail I hadn't noticed on the map, a narrow path veiled by ferns and moss. I was curious and decided to follow it, thinking it might lead to a secluded waterfall. The deeper I went, the thicker the mist became, curling around the trunks like ghostly fingers. The forest grew unnaturally quiet. No birds, no wind, not even the rustle of small animals. Then I heard it. Faint whispers, barely audible at first, like someone mumbling my name. I froze. My heart raced. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" The sound stopped. I laughed nervously, blaming the wind, and continued. But every few minutes, the whispers returned, closer now, overlapping with the echoes of my own footsteps. I couldn't see anyone. There was no one. And yet, I could feel them. Eyes in the shadows, following me through the cedars. Something was out there, waiting. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just my imagination. But the whispers persisted, growing clearer. "Daniel." They hissed, soft but urgent. The hair on my neck stood on end. I spun around, but the forest was empty. Only the twisted trunks and hanging moss stared back at me. Suddenly, a branch snapped behind me. I jumped, swinging my flashlight around. Nothing. I took a deep breath and pressed on. Moving faster now, the trail winding steeply down toward the river below. My flashlight flickered, plunging me into darkness for a moment. In that brief shadow, I swore I saw a figure, a tall, thin silhouette, standing perfectly still, staring at me from the mist. I blinked. It was gone. I rationalized it again. Perhaps it was a deer or some other animal. But the air had changed. It was heavier, suffocating, charged with something ancient and malevolent. The whispers weren't coming from a single direction anymore. They surrounded me, echoing through the trees in patterns no human voice could mimic. And then, I saw footprints in the mud. Muddy, wet, human-shaped, but enormous. My boots barely matched their size. They weren't mine. And they led deeper into the forest, straight toward the waterfall I'd been seeking, and straight into the heart of whatever was following me. I hesitated at the edge of a small clearing, my flashlight beam trembling in the thick mist. The footprints were still there, wet and glistening, winding deeper into a tangle of cedars I hadn't seen on the trail map. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but curiosity and some irrational thrill kept me moving forward. The whispers had changed. They weren't just saying my name anymore. They were repeating phrases I couldn't understand, like a language my mind refused to decode. My heart pounded as I realized they weren't coming from one spot. They were all around me, swirling like a cold wind that had no source. Suddenly, I heard a low, guttural laugh echo through the trees. I froze. It sounded human, yet distorted, stretched in a way that made my stomach knot. My flashlight flickered again, and in that brief darkness, I saw movement. Branches bending as though something enormous was walking just beyond the mist. I whispered to myself, "It's just the wind." Just the wind. But even as I said it, the feeling of being watched intensified. Something, or someone, was tracking my every step, keeping pace, waiting. I stepped forward. The footprints led toward an abandoned ranger cabin I hadn't noticed on the map. Its windows were dark, broken, like black eyes staring into my soul. I approached the cabin cautiously. Every step felt louder than the last, echoing against the silence. The whispers were now inside my head, repeating a single word I couldn't quite make out. My pulse raced. I told myself it was fear playing tricks, but my instincts screamed otherwise. I reached the cabin door. It was slightly ajar, swaying slowly as if someone, or something, had been inside very recently. The smell hit me first. Damp earth mixed with decayed wood. And something else, a metallic tang I couldn't identify. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the door handle. Then I heard it. A soft, scratching sound, like fingernails dragging across wood. From inside, I swallowed hard and pushed the door open. The interior was pitch black, my flashlight barely piercing the gloom. Broken furniture was scattered across the floor, and the walls were scratched with strange, circular patterns, almost like symbols. The whispers were louder now, frantic, surrounding me, urging me to leave, but also tempting me closer. And then I saw it, a shadow moving across the far wall. Not human, but shaped vaguely like one. It paused, tilted its head as if studying me, and then vanished into the darkness. I realized, with a chill, that I wasn't alone in this cabin. And I never had been. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the debris on the floor. The whispers became louder, overlapping in a cacophony of unintelligible voices, growing angrier, almost pleading. My stomach churned. I needed to leave. But something drew me deeper into the cabin, toward a dark staircase descending into a cellar I hadn't noticed before. Against all reason, I went down. The air grew colder, heavier, and the whispers seemed to echo off the stone walls. My flashlight flickered violently, then steadied. At the bottom, the cellar opened into a small room. In the center lay a circle of stones, arranged meticulously, with strange, dark stains I didn't want to identify. Then I saw writing on the wall, letters etched deep into the stone, dripping a black substance that smelled like burnt wood. My mind couldn't process it. I stepped closer. The whispers converged into a single word: leave. I froze. The shadows shifted around the edges of the room, forming tall, spindly figures, impossibly thin and disturbingly human-shaped. They didn't move quickly, but every time I blinked, they were closer. My body screamed to run, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. And then, one of them raised a hand and pointed directly at me. I don't remember running up the stairs. I just remember the cabin door slamming shut behind me, as if the forest itself had decided to trap me. I burst out of the cabin and into the cold forest air, gasping for breath. My flashlight beam cut through the mist, illuminating twisted roots and low-hanging branches. But the whispers didn't stop. They followed me, echoing through the trees. My instincts screamed that if I stopped, I would never leave this forest alive. I ran blindly, tripping over roots, brushing past ferns that scratched at my arms. The footprints I had seen earlier reappeared, giant, wet, leading away from the cabin. I didn't understand how anyone, or anything, could move so silently, yet leave such massive prints. Suddenly, the forest opened into a small clearing, the waterfall I had been seeking glistening under the fading light. Relief surged through me, but it was short-lived. Across the water, I saw movement. Another shadow standing perfectly still, staring. Its eyes glowed faintly in the twilight, reflecting my flashlight. I froze, realizing it had been following me all along, always watching, always waiting. The whispers grew into full sentences now. "You can't leave. Not yet." I backed away slowly, slipping on wet rocks. The shadow mirrored my movements step for step, like a predator toying with its prey. My mind raced. How could something so still, so silent, track me? How could it even exist in the first place? I knew I had to get out. I ran along the bank of the stream, searching desperately for a trail. The whispers became screams, now clearly around me, bouncing off the trees, disorienting me. I tripped and fell into the cold water, the icy current shocking my system. I scrambled out, soaking wet, and realized the waterfall's gentle roar had masked footsteps behind me. Heavy, deliberate, and closing in fast. Panic clawed at me. I looked back and saw it. The shadow was no longer distant. It was close, towering over the trees like a nightmare come alive. I could barely make out a face, if it could even be called a face, distorted, shifting as if the forest itself had molded it from darkness. I ran blindly, branches slashing my arms, mud sucking at my boots, until I stumbled onto an old ranger trail. Relief washed over me. I knew where this path led, back to civilization. I slowed, thinking I had escaped. But then I heard it clearly, right behind me. "You're ours now." I spun, heart hammering. No one was there, only the fog, the cedars, and the lingering whispers echoing through the trees. I reached the main trail, following familiar markers back toward the ranger station. My legs burned, but the forest seemed endless. Every time I looked behind, the shadows were gone, but the whispers lingered, sometimes faint, sometimes insistent. I felt eyes on me constantly. I emerged into a clearing where the morning sun was breaking through the mist. Relief and exhaustion collided inside me. I could see the ranger station in the distance. I sprinted the last few hundred meters, bursting inside, slamming the door. The ranger on duty looked up, startled. I tried to explain, breathless, about the shadows, the whispers, the cabin, the footprints, but he simply shook his head. "People get lost in the Ho all the time," he said. "You're lucky to have found your way back." I wanted to argue, to insist that what I had seen was real, but the words caught in my throat. Later, when I looked at the pictures I had taken, the images were wrong. The shadows in the photos moved, even though I had held the camera perfectly still. And in one photo of the trail, I saw footprints leading off the frame. Giant, wet, human-shaped, but not mine. That night, I couldn't sleep. The whispers haunted me in my dreams, echoing from the forest. I woke several times, heart hammering, certain I could hear footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. Weeks later, curiosity, or perhaps fear, drove me back to the Ho rainforest. I followed the same trail cautiously, camera in hand, heart pounding. But the cabin was gone. The trees had swallowed it completely, as though it had never existed. The footprints were gone, and the clearing near the waterfall was empty. Yet the air felt heavier, charged. I could almost hear faint whispers in the wind. And then, a movement in the corner of my eye. A shadow, tall and thin, standing between two cedars, watching me. It didn't move when I approached. It didn't move when I retreated. I left immediately, vowing never to return. But sometimes, late at night, when the forest is quiet and the wind rustles the trees just right, I swear I can hear it calling my name. I still don't understand what I encountered in the Hoh rainforest. Were the shadows alive? Spirits? Something older? Something that doesn't belong to our world? I may never know. All I know is that curiosity can be dangerous. Even a quiet forest trail can hide nightmares older than time itself. And the whispers, they never fully stop. Sometimes I hear them through the hum of my apartment in the quiet of the night. Reminders that whatever I saw is still out there, watching, waiting. I warn anyone who dares venture into those misty woods, be careful which paths you follow. And if you hear your name whispered from between the trees, run. Because some encounters leave scars you can't see, and some shadows never let you go. My name is Rachel, and this happened last autumn. I was driving along an old logging road near Mount Rainier, a route I'd taken dozens of times. That evening, a storm was rolling in, turning the forest into a wall of shadows and rain. The road was slick, leaves clinging to the asphalt, and the wind howled through the treetops like a chorus of unseen voices. I was alone, my headlights cutting a narrow path through the blackness. I love solitary drives, the quiet hum of tires on wet pavement. But that night, the forest felt alive. Somewhere in the distance, I saw a flicker of light, maybe another car, maybe a campfire. Curious, I turned onto a smaller side road, one I'd never noticed before. The road immediately narrowed, overgrown with branches that scratched the car roof as I drove under them. I checked my GPS. No signal. The road stretched endlessly, twisting unnaturally between thick cedar trees, disappearing into the fog. I laughed nervously, thinking it must reconnect soon. But the deeper I went, the stranger it became. Then I noticed tire tracks alongside mine, fresh, massive, and irregular. They weren't human. They wound alongside me, matching every twist and turn of the road. My pulse quickened. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a truck had been here earlier. But instinct screamed that whatever made those tracks was following me. The rain intensified, drumming against the windshield like 1,000 small hands. My wipers struggled to keep the view clear, and the tire tracks seemed to shift, always staying parallel no matter how many twists the road had. I tried to convince myself it was coincidence. Suddenly, I caught movement in the periphery. Something black moving between the trees, darting in and out of the fog. I blinked, and it vanished. I pressed harder on the accelerator, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles whitened. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, but I didn't dare. Minutes passed. The road twisted more sharply, leading to a dense area where the trees almost met overhead, forming a tunnel of shadows. My headlights revealed strange carvings on the bark, symbols I didn't recognize, jagged, etched deep, as if warning me to turn back. I considered going back, but the road behind me had changed. The tracks leading away from my car were gone, replaced by smooth, untouched asphalt, like no one had passed that way. My heart pounded. I was trapped. Then I saw it. A figure standing under a tree ahead. Tall, impossibly thin, face obscured by shadows, arms hanging unnaturally long at its sides. I slammed the brakes, skidding slightly. The figure didn't move, but the moment my car halted, I felt the unmistakable sensation of eyes on me. From every direction, I told myself to stay calm. I took a deep breath and tried to rationalize what I saw. Maybe it was a trick of the rain, the fog, my own fear. But the hairs on my arms and neck stood on end, and my hands trembled. The figure didn't move, didn't even blink, or maybe it had no eyes. I slowly inched the car forward, the tires crunching over wet leaves. With every meter, the figure seemed closer, though I knew it hadn't moved. It was like the forest itself was bending reality around me, warping distance and space. I noticed that my headlights reflected in the wet asphalt, revealing more of the strange symbols carved into the trees lining the road. They weren't random. They were organized, repeating patterns, almost forming words. I tried to read them, but couldn't focus. My mind refused. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. Footprints in the mud on the side of the road. Massive, humanoid, yet distorted, too long, too wide. They didn't belong to any animal I knew, and their spacing implied a gait impossible for a human. And they led straight toward me. I slammed the brakes again. The car slid, but the tires caught the wet ground. The figure under the tree was gone. I thought I had a moment of relief, until I saw it reflected in my rearview mirror. Dozens of eyes, glowing faintly, staring at me from the fog, following me as I moved. I floored the accelerator. My tires splashed through puddles as the car skidded along the winding road. The fog thickened, obscuring the symbols, the trees, and even the road ahead. But I could still sense it. Something moving with me, just beyond my headlights, keeping pace with perfect silence. A low guttural sound reached me then, barely audible over the rain, but unmistakable. It wasn't wind. It wasn't a truck. It was a growl, low and hungry, vibrating in the very air around me. My stomach turned. The road twisted sharply again, and I barely noticed the massive figure stepping onto the asphalt ahead until I was almost upon it. Its limbs were too long, bending at impossible angles, and its face, I couldn't see a face. Only darkness, with a faint hint of movement that suggested something alive, intelligent, and malicious. I swerved, heart racing, nearly crashing into a tree. When I looked back, the figure was gone. My pulse still thundering, I realized the road had changed. The path behind me was no longer familiar. I had been driving in circles, or maybe the forest itself had shifted. Then my headlights caught something, another vehicle, abandoned, sitting in the middle of the road. The driver's side door was open, swinging in the wind, but there was no one inside. Muddy footprints led from the car into the darkness of the forest. I stepped on the brakes and tried to process what I was seeing. The abandoned vehicle looked ordinary at first glance, just a beaten-up SUV, doors open. But something about it screamed danger. My gut told me not to approach, yet curiosity, or maybe terror-driven instinct, drew me closer. I parked my car a few feet away, leaving the engine running. Muddy footprints led into the forest, disappearing into the thick fog between the cedars. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out, the rain immediately soaking me. Each step squelched in the mud, and the whispers returned, soft at first, then insistent, as though the forest itself was speaking to me. I followed the footprints cautiously. The symbols carved into the trees grew more elaborate here, spiraling like some sort of ritual. My heart pounded as I realized these markings weren't random. They were guiding me, or perhaps warning me. Suddenly, the footprints stopped. I scanned the fog with my flashlight and froze. Standing a few yards away was the same tall, thin figure I had glimpsed earlier. It didn't move, didn't blink, and its long arms hung unnaturally at its sides. My flashlight flickered, and for a split second, I saw multiple figures behind it, emerging from the mist. Before I could react, The whispers became a deafening chorus, repeating my name. The forest seemed alive, pulsating, bending around me, trapping me in a nightmare I couldn't escape. Panic surged. I turned and ran back toward my car, mud sucking at my boots, branches clawing at my arms. The figures didn't chase me, at least not visibly, but the forest itself seemed to resist my escape. Every time I tried to sprint, roots and mud seemed to anchor me in place. I reached my car and slammed the door, fumbling with the keys. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. The whispers had morphed into voices, speaking in a language I didn't understand. But somehow, I felt every word in my chest. They were warning me, or perhaps taunting me. As I started the engine, the figures appeared again, this time closer. One stood directly in the middle of the road, impossibly tall, its face hidden in shadow. The rain reflected in its eyes, or were they eyes? I couldn't tell. My chest tightened with fear. I slammed the car into gear and swerved around it. My tires skidded on wet leaves and mud, but the road seemed to twist unnaturally to allow my escape. The forest moaned with wind, shadows stretching unnaturally long, as if the trees themselves were alive. Then, I saw something even worse. A figure seated inside the abandoned SUV I had just left. Its head slowly turned toward me, black void where a face should be, watching, waiting, smiling, or pretending to. I floored the accelerator, heart pounding, vision blurring in the rain. The road seemed to stretch infinitely, twisting unnaturally between trees that had grown impossibly close together. I dared not glance in the rearview mirror. Fear of what I might see was paralyzing. Then I noticed the fog thickening ahead. My headlights barely cut through it. The whispers were now screams, echoing in the forest and inside my skull simultaneously. Every instinct screamed to stop, but I knew if I did, I would be trapped. Suddenly, the car slid on a slick patch of mud. I struggled with the steering wheel, and the car came to a violent halt. Through the windshield, I saw them. Dozens of shadowy figures emerging from the mist, encircling the car. Tall, thin, impossibly human-like, but wrong in every way. Their heads tilted at impossible angles, limbs bending unnaturally. I locked the doors, trembling. The whispers grew urgent, almost demanding. I could feel their eyes on me, penetrating through metal and glass, into my mind. One figure tapped on the windshield, long fingers leaving streaks of mist and darkness. I realized then that this forest had no rules, no logic. It wasn't just following me. It was testing me, drawing me deeper, orchestrating every turn, every step, every heartbeat. And I was completely powerless. Desperation took over. I revved the engine, smashing through mud and roots, swerving violently. Every figure that appeared on the roadside vanished as quickly as it came, only to reappear ahead, blocking my escape. The forest had become a living maze, alive with dark intent. Then I saw movement on the side of the road. A figure crouched low, almost merging with the underbrush, staring directly at me. Its face, or the void where a face should have been, seemed to radiate hatred, intelligence, and patience. This was no random predator. This was something ancient, something calculating. I swerved again, narrowly avoiding colliding with a tree. My headlights caught the figures once more, encroaching closer, circling in a pattern that defied logic. I realized I was being funneled, driven towards something I couldn't comprehend. Ahead, the road split into a Y-shaped fork, both paths disappearing into unnatural darkness. I had no choice. I chose the left path and slammed the car into motion. The mud flew up in sheets, the forest groaning in protest, and the whispers turned into shrieks. And then I saw it. The SUV I had abandoned, now fully intact, sitting in the middle of the left fork. And inside, the faceless figure leaned out the window, long black limbs reaching for me. Fingers stretching impossibly toward the car, my pulse hammered. I swerved violently, narrowly avoiding the SUV, but the forest had changed again. The path behind me no longer existed. The fork had vanished, replaced by an endless corridor of trees and fog. Panic consumed me. The whispers grew louder, forming words I could almost comprehend. Stay. Join us. Never leave. They echoed in my mind, not as language, but as a feeling, a command. My chest burned with fear, my fingers gripping the wheel until I thought they would snap. The SUV vanished from view, replaced by shadows stretching from the trees, clawing at the edges of my vision. I saw shapes moving in ways impossible in real life. Branches bending, the fog twisting into humanoid forms, shadows shifting independently of light. I floored the accelerator, screaming, praying for the road to end. The forest seemed to stretch infinitely, unyielding, alive. I glimpsed a clearing up ahead, a faint glow piercing the fog. My last ounce of hope surged. I would make it out. But as I reached the clearing, the shadows coalesced. Figures stepped into the light, towering, distorted, countless, surrounding me completely. The glow revealed their faces, or rather, the voids where faces should be. Black pits absorbing every ounce of light. I don't remember how I got out of that forest. One moment I was surrounded, the next I was on a main road, daylight breaking over Mount Rainier. My car was intact, no mud, no damage, and the forest behind me looked serene, untouched by the horrors I had just faced. But I knew it wasn't over. I could feel it, the forest watching me, the whispers lingering in my mind. The SUV, the figures, the impossible tire tracks. It had been real, and it hadn't let me go, not truly. Weeks later, I tried returning. The logging road was gone. The fork in the road, the path into the mist, the symbols. They had vanished completely. It was as if the forest had erased all evidence, leaving only my memory and the scars of fear it etched into my mind. Sometimes, when driving alone at night, I swear I see them. Tall, thin shadows flitting between trees in the corner of my vision. And sometimes, when the fog rolls in thick, I hear whispers. They are not calling my name. They are calling to others, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to wander into their forest. I will never return. And I warn you, if you see a road that shouldn't exist, do not follow it. Some paths are not meant to be traveled. My name is Lucas, and this happened during a camping trip in the dense forests near the Olympic Peninsula. I had planned a weekend getaway, wanting solitude, fresh air, and the quiet peace of the wilderness. I never expected to find something alive with malice. The first day was perfect. Sunlight filtered through towering cedars, and the smell of damp earth and pine filled the air. I hiked a little farther than planned, following a stream that twisted into a secluded part of the forest. That's when I saw it. A cabin. Small, wooden, almost invisible between the trees. But something about it was off. It wasn't on any map. No one had mentioned it. Curiosity pushed me closer. The structure looked abandoned at first glance, but I noticed faint signs of recent use. Smoke-stained logs in a fire pit, footprints in the mud, a small stack of firewood neatly arranged. I felt an uneasy tingle crawl up my spine. The forest around me was unnaturally quiet. Every bird and squirrel vanished. I stepped closer, heart hammering, and heard it, a soft whisper from inside the cabin. A woman's voice, almost melodic, saying my name. My instinct screamed to leave, but something compelled me to open the door. The interior was dark, and the smell hit me first. Damp wood, moss, and something metallic, faint but unmistakable. And then I saw it. A chair rocking gently by itself, as if welcoming me in. I froze at the doorway, staring at the chair. It rocked slowly, creaking on the wooden floor, though there was no breeze. I wanted to turn and run, but something drew me in, a compulsion I couldn't explain. My flashlight revealed more. The walls were scratched with symbols, like claw marks, etched deep into the wood, twisted shapes forming patterns I couldn't decipher. Then the whispers returned, louder, surrounding me. My name repeated over and over, but distorted, sometimes slow, sometimes fast, almost overlapping itself. I felt a presence behind me, though every time I spun around, nothing was there. I stepped further in, trying to remain calm. The air grew colder, pressing against my chest like an invisible weight. The chair stopped rocking. Silence. And then, a thud upstairs. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing above me. I called out, my voice trembling. "Hello? Is someone there?" No answer. Just the soft creak of floorboards above. My flashlight flickered, revealing shadows that seemed to shift independently of the objects they were cast from. Then I saw it. A door at the back of the cabin, slightly ajar, leading into complete darkness. The whispers intensified, now almost pleading. I realized, with a chill, that whatever lived here, whatever had been calling me, was not human. And it wanted me inside. I inched toward the back door, every nerve screaming to stop. The whispers were relentless, echoing in my mind. Each step I took felt like walking into a trap I could never escape. The air was thick, cold, almost wet, clinging to my skin. As I reached the doorway, I noticed the floor around it was covered in dirt, leaves, and something darker, stains that weren't mud. I couldn't identify it, but my stomach turned. Beyond the door, the room was black, the beam of my flashlight barely penetrating. I could see shapes moving in the shadows, twisting unnaturally. Then, the chair from earlier moved again, sliding across the floor with no visible force, stopping just as I stepped fully into the room. A faint outline appeared on the far wall, a figure hunched over, almost dissolving into the darkness. It tilted its head toward me. I could feel its gaze. I tried to back away, but the door slammed shut behind me, cutting off my escape. The whispers became a chorus of voices, overlapping and incomprehensible, yet somehow filled with malice. My flashlight flickered violently. I stumbled, falling against a wooden crate. When I looked up, the figure was closer. No, multiple figures, stretching, bending, impossibly thin, standing silently in the darkness. I realized then, this cabin was alive. It wasn't abandoned. It was waiting. And it had been expecting me. I pressed myself against the wall, heart pounding, and tried to think. The figures didn't move, didn't make a sound. Yet I felt their attention locked on me, like invisible hands gripping my mind. The air was thick, damp, carrying the metallic scent I couldn't place. I noticed a staircase leading to a second floor, partially hidden by darkness. The whispers seemed louder up there, beckoning me. Against every instinct, I climbed, each creak of the steps amplifying the tension, echoing through the cabin like a drum of doom. At the top, the hallway stretched unnaturally, longer than it should have been. Doors lined each side, but none were fully closed. Shadows slithered along the walls, stretching and shrinking, independent of the light. My flashlight flickered again, and for a brief moment, I saw faces, hundreds of them, pressed against the walls, screaming silently. I froze. A low, guttural sound rose behind me, and I realized the figures had followed me upstairs. They didn't walk. They appeared. One by one, from the shadows. They formed in the corners, their elongated limbs bending impossibly, faces featureless, yet watching. I stumbled toward the last door at the end of the hallway. A faint light glowed beneath it, warm but unnatural. My hand shook as I reached for the handle, knowing I had no choice. Whatever was calling me from this cabin, I had to confront it. I opened the door slowly. Inside, the room was empty, except for a small fireplace. In it, embers glowed a strange green, casting the walls in an unnatural light. Around the room, strange symbols were carved deep into every surface, spiraling toward the ceiling. And then I saw it. A mirror, old and cracked, leaning against the far wall. I stepped closer, and my reflection was wrong. My body was distorted, my arms too long, my shadow stretching into shapes I didn't recognize. Behind me, a figure appeared in the mirror, mimicking my movements, but moving slightly out of sync. I turned, flashlight shaking, but the room was empty. The whispering voices had become screams, echoing from the mirror itself. I realized this cabin wasn't just alive. It fed on fear, on attention, and now it had claimed me as its audience. Suddenly, the mirror vibrated, then shattered with a deafening crash. Splinters of glass flew across the room, yet the reflection remained, staring. My breathing grew shallow, sweat mixing with the rain that had seeped in through broken windows. I backed toward the door, feeling the pressure of invisible hands trying to hold me in place. The figures appeared again in the corners, impossibly fast, closing the room in around me. I knew if I didn't leave now, I'd never escape this cabin alive. I ran for the stairs, feeling the floorboards bend beneath my weight. The figures multiplied, appearing behind me, in front of me, seemingly everywhere at once. My flashlight flickered, casting long, impossible shadows that danced across the walls. At the bottom, the cabin seemed larger than before. Doors that hadn't existed earlier now opened to pitch-black rooms. I could hear the whispers moving, circling me, impossible to pinpoint. It was as if the cabin itself had become a predator, aware of my every move. I saw the front door ahead, my only chance. I ran, skidding across the wet wooden floor. Then a hand, too long, too thin, emerged from the darkness and grazed my shoulder. Pain shot through me, and I nearly fell. I screamed, yanking free and plunging through the door. Outside, the rain had stopped. The forest was eerily still, mist curling along the ground. The cabin stood behind me, intact, as if it had never moved, never warped the hallways, never summoned the figures. I ran blindly down the path, hearing the whispers fade, but never fully leaving. When I finally reached my car hours later, mud-streaked and soaked, I found a note on the windshield, written in deep, claw-like letters. "You will return." I drove without thinking, hands gripping the wheel, heart hammering. The road back seemed endless, twisting unnaturally, as if the forest itself was delaying my escape. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see figures chasing me. But the road behind appeared normal, untouched. I tried to rationalize it. Sleep deprivation, stress, isolation. It had to be an elaborate hallucination. Yet my body remembered the cold, the whispers, the impossible movements of the figures. The fear was real. Days later, I returned to the cabin's location with a GPS. Nothing. The area was just dense forest, no road, no clearing, no cabin. I scoured maps and local guides. No cabin had ever existed there. Friends who had hiked the same trails confirmed nothing. But sometimes, I see them. In dark windows when I drive past abandoned buildings, or reflected in mirrors when I'm home alone. The long, thin figures, watching silently, waiting. And I know, if I ever return to that forest, the cabin will be there, unchanged, and it will claim me completely. I warn anyone who explores the deep woods. Some cabins are not meant to be found. Some roads, some paths, lead only to what is alive and hungry, waiting for its next visitor. Weeks later, I received a package at my home. No return address. Inside, a small carved wooden figure, twisted humanoid shape, unnervingly detailed. Alongside it, a note in the same claw-like letters. "We saw you leave." Panic surged through me. My mind raced. I had not given anyone my location. My solitude, my escape, had been observed. I couldn't sleep. The shadows in my room seemed longer, stretching toward me, echoing the movements of the figures in the cabin. That night, the whispers returned. Not from the forest, but from the darkness inside my own home. Soft at first, then urgent, almost teasing. I could hear the scraping of claws, light but deliberate, moving across floors and walls. I dared not move. The next morning, the wooden figure had moved. Not far, just slightly, but enough to know it had been handled or animated while I slept. The realization hit me like a blade. Whatever had been in that cabin, whatever had called me, it could reach me anywhere. I packed a bag, prepared to leave town, but something held me back. Fear, knowledge, a twisted fascination I couldn't ignore. I knew the cabin's presence would haunt me forever, and so would the promise. You will return. Over the next months, my life became a careful balance between fear and normality. I avoided forests, mirrors, and even the reflection of windows at night. Yet I could not escape the feeling of being watched. Every quiet moment, I imagined the thin figures lurking in the corners of my vision, always patient, always waiting. I returned to the town near the forest once, pretending to hike. But I never got close to the area. Locals spoke of abandoned cabins, lost hikers, and strange disappearances, but none mentioned the one I had found. Perhaps it didn't exist in their reality. Perhaps it existed only for me. I began documenting my experience, drawing the symbols, writing every detail I could remember, hoping to warn others. The moment I put pen to paper, the whispers would start again, faint, teasing, as if aware of my actions. They seemed drawn to attention, and I feared that sharing the story might call them closer. And yet, I could not stop. The cabin, the figures, the whispers. They were a part of me now, embedded in my mind, impossible to ignore. The more I remember, the more I know I am never truly free. I still have the wooden figure on my shelf. Sometimes, in dim light, it seems to twitch, bend, or shift its gaze. I know the cabin is out there, waiting, unchanged by time, watching, summoning. If you ever find yourself alone in the forests of the Pacific Northwest, heed this warning. Not everything that appears abandoned is empty. Some cabins have lives of their own. Some forests have eyes, and some whispers are more than imagination. I will never return. But I know one day, someone else will wander into that cabin, into that forest, and it will claim them. And maybe, just maybe, they will hear the same whispers, see the same shadows, and realize too late that some doors are never meant to be opened. I keep telling myself it's over. But deep down, I know the cabin watches, waits, and remembers. And if I ever hear my name whispered in the wind, I will know it has begun again. My name is Ethan, and this happened last summer while hiking in the dense forests near Mount Hood. I had always loved the outdoors, but I had no idea how wrong a peaceful hike could turn. The first morning, I set off with my backpack, camera, and notebook. Birds chirped, sunlight spilled through the trees, and the air smelled of moss and pine. I felt calm, content in the solitude. But as I ventured deeper, I noticed something odd. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches creaking softly, almost like they were speaking. At first, I laughed at myself, thinking the wind was playing tricks. But the sound grew too rhythmic, too intentional. Whispers, faint just beyond comprehension, seemed to float through the forest. My pulse quickened. I stopped, trying to locate the source. But there was nothing. No animals, no other hikers. Just me and the growing murmurs among the trees. Curiosity battled fear. I followed the whispers, deeper into the forest, past trails I had never seen, where sunlight barely touched the ground. The air grew colder, damp and heavy, like the forest itself was watching. Then I saw a clearing ahead. The trees formed a perfect circle, leaning inward, their leaves rustling in unison. I stepped closer, and the whispers intensified, forming my name over and over, as if calling me toward the center. I hesitated at the edge of the clearing, my heartbeat hammering. The whispers were clearer now, like distant voices carried on the wind, repeating my name. My rational mind screamed to turn back, but my curiosity, my obsession with capturing unusual experiences, drove me forward. The ground inside the circle was unusually soft, moss-covered, and slightly damp, as if it had absorbed countless footsteps over decades. I noticed strange markings etched into the bark of the surrounding trees, spirals, jagged lines, symbols that didn't make sense. Something about them felt warning-like, but I ignored it. As I stepped further in, I realized the whispers weren't coming from one direction. They were everywhere. The forest had become a living entity, speaking in tongues I couldn't comprehend, murmuring secrets meant only for me. I paused, shining my flashlight across the clearing. That's when I saw it. A figure crouched among the roots of a massive cedar, pale, thin, and unnaturally still. Its head tilted toward me in a way that seemed both curious and predatory. Suddenly, the branches above me rustled violently, forming shapes that almost resembled faces, each one leering, whispering, warning me simultaneously. I realized the forest wasn't just alive, it was intelligent, aware, and watching my every move. My instincts screamed to run, but fear and fascination rooted me in place. I could feel my skin prickling, my pulse thrumming as if in sync with the forest itself. The whispers became urgent, almost pleading or threatening. I shone my flashlight on the crouched figure. It didn't move, but I could feel its gaze burning into me. Every nerve in my body screamed that I shouldn't be here. And yet, something inside me, some foolish part, told me to stay. I stepped closer, and the figure disappeared. Not ran, not hid, vanished. The whispers intensified, now surrounding me completely, moving through the ground, the air, and my mind. The forest had closed in, and I realized I was no longer alone. From the corner of my eye, I saw shadows moving unnaturally along the edges of the clearing. They weren't animals. They were thin, elongated, human-like, yet wrong. Limbs bending at impossible angles. They hovered just beyond the trees, watching, waiting. A sudden gust of wind carried a chill across my neck. I spun around, and one of the tree faces seemed to wink. Or was it a shadow playing tricks? The whispers converged into a single word. Join. I stumbled backward, tripping over roots. The forest seemed to react, branches snapping, leaves rustling violently, forming a wall of whispers and movement. My flashlight flickered, casting elongated shadows that moved independently of anything in the clearing. I scrambled to my feet, my flashlight swinging wildly. The shadows moved faster now, bending around the trunks of the whispering trees like liquid darkness. My mind screamed at me to run, but my feet felt rooted to the mossy ground. Suddenly, a rustling sound came from directly above. I looked up to see the branches shifting unnaturally, forming a tunnel-like archway. Faces, dozens of them, emerged from the bark, eyes hollow, mouths open in silent screams. The whispers intensified, forming a chorus of voices that seemed to echo inside my skull. I backed away slowly, trying to keep my flashlight steady. That's when I saw them. Thin, elongated figures stepping silently from between the trees, moving in perfect synchronization, their limbs bending in ways no human body could. Each step they took seemed to press the air itself into my lungs, suffocating me. The whispering grew louder, repeating my name, beckoning me toward the center of the clearing. My heart pounded in my ears. The forest seemed alive, stretching and contorting, guiding me forward. A sudden movement caught my attention, a shadow darting between the trees. It was small at first, like a child, but then grew impossibly tall, towering above me, tilting its head to watch. The whispers now sounded almost pleading. "Come, join us." I realized then that the forest wasn't just haunted, it was hungry, and I was its prey. Panic took over. I turned and ran, crashing through low branches, tripping over roots. The forest seemed to shift around me, paths disappearing, new trees emerging where there were none. The whispers followed, circling me like a storm of sound, echoing my fears and doubts back at me. I stumbled into another clearing. A massive cedar stood in the center, its trunk covered with carved symbols glowing faintly in the dim light. The air smelled of damp earth and something metallic. My flashlight flickered, and I thought I saw movement within the carvings, shapes bending, twisting, almost reaching out. From the corner of my eye, one of the thin figures emerged from the mist. It didn't run, it didn't chase. It just watched, tilting its head in unnatural synchrony with the whispering trees. My chest tightened with fear, every instinct screaming that the forest had marked me. I ran blindly, my flashlight beam bouncing across the twisted trunks. Every shadow seemed alive, every rustle a whisper calling my name. The forest was no longer a collection of trees. It was a labyrinth, alive and conscious, intent on trapping me inside. Then I saw it. A faintly glowing path between two massive trees, leading deeper. It pulsed with light, almost inviting me in. I knew it wasn't safe, but I had no other choice. I followed the glowing path, branches brushing against my skin as if guiding me somewhere. The whispers grew louder, now overlapping into indecipherable sentences, urging me forward. Every step felt like sinking into the forest itself. The path led to a hollowed-out grove, surrounded by trees so close they formed a natural dome. Inside, the ground was soft, almost sponge-like. Shadows moved independently of the trees, flitting across the moss like living shapes. I froze when I noticed one of the humanoid figures perched atop a fallen trunk, its head tilted, long limbs dangling impossibly. A sudden gust of wind carried dozens of whispers at once, forming a single, distorted voice. "You cannot leave. Not yet." My stomach lurched. I realized the forest had me trapped, not by walls, not by barriers, but by manipulating my perception, bending reality to ensure I couldn't escape. I tried to backtrack, but the path behind me vanished. The trees seemed closer, pressing in. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the trunks, morphing into grotesque shapes, reaching toward me. My flashlight flickered and died. I was plunged into darkness, surrounded by whispers and shapes I couldn't comprehend. I felt hands, cold, ethereal, brush my arms and legs. Panic consumed me. And then I heard it. A whisper, unmistakable, directly in my ear, cold and deliberate. "You belong to the forest now." I stumbled blindly, groping along tree trunks, trying to find a way out. The whispers had become screams in my head, overlapping, impossible to distinguish. Every shadow shifted toward me, bending, stretching, multiplying. My heart raced, lungs burned, and I realized I couldn't trust my senses. Suddenly, a figure emerged directly in front of me, tall, thin, featureless face tilting downward. Its limbs bent in impossible ways, and yet it moved with grace. I froze, convinced it was the end. The whispers swelled into a chorus, repeating my name, then another command. "Follow." Against my will, I took a step forward, and another. My body moved on its own, drawn toward the center of the grove. I could feel the forest around me, pulsing, alive, manipulating me like a puppet. The shadows flickered, forming grotesque, human-like faces, each one screaming silently. Then I saw them. Dozens of thin figures emerging from the tree trunks themselves, bending through the wood, crawling, yet moving impossibly fast. The forest had merged with them. The whispers now sounded like one entity, calling me, drawing me in. I realized, in that moment, that the forest didn't just want me. It wanted me to become part of it, to join the whispers, the shadows, the trees themselves. And I understood. Escape was no longer an option. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My legs moved forward automatically, guided by some force deeper into the grove. The whispering had become a deafening roar in my mind, repeating my name over and over, accompanied by unintelligible words that seemed almost like a chant. The shadows around me thickened, coiling like living smoke, crawling along the trees, forming grotesque shapes. One of the figures reached toward me with impossibly long fingers, and I felt a sharp, icy pain on my shoulder, like nails digging into my skin. Yet when I looked down, nothing was there. Ahead, a small clearing appeared, circular and perfectly smooth, the ground covered in dark moss. In the center, an enormous tree rose, its trunk carved with symbols glowing faintly green, pulsing as if alive. From the base of the tree, tendrils of shadow snaked outward, curling around the smaller trees, weaving them into a single, writhing mass. The whispers coalesced into a single voice. "Become one with us." I realized, with terror, that the forest didn't just watch. It consumed. It transformed. Everyone it trapped became part of its twisted existence. I stumbled forward, my mind struggling against the force guiding me, but it was futile. My body was moving on its own, toward the center, toward the enormous tree that seemed to breathe. I reached the edge of the glowing tree, the whispers now deafening in my skull. Shadows rose from the mossy ground, stretching toward me, wrapping around my limbs. Panic surged, and I fought with everything I had, trying to pull away. The humanoid figures materialized around me, circling, their long limbs bending in impossible angles, faces featureless yet watching. The forest pulsed, and I could feel its hunger in my chest, pressing against my heart, draining my courage. Then, from within the tree, a single tendril shot out, wrapping around my ankle. It pulled me closer, slowly, inexorably. I fell to the ground, struggling, clawing at the moss, trying to find leverage. The whispers now spoke in unison, chanting my name, calling me to surrender. Suddenly, the ground beneath me shifted. I found myself sliding down a moss-covered incline inside a hollow beneath the tree. Shadows swirled around me, tightening, compressing the space. My flashlight flickered weakly, revealing hundreds of faint, ghostly faces embedded in the bark of the tree, all staring at me. I realized with bone-deep terror, I wasn't just being captured. I was becoming part of the forest. My consciousness, my identity, was being absorbed into the whispers. The last thing I remember is the pulsing green light enveloping me, the whispers merging with my thoughts. My body stiffened as if no longer my own. I screamed in my mind, but the sound dissolved into the chorus of voices already trapped within the forest. When I opened my eyes, or thought I did, I was no longer in the clearing. I was everywhere and nowhere at once, able to sense every whisper, every shadow, every tree. The forest had claimed me completely. My humanity felt like a distant memory. I understood now. The forest doesn't just trap people, it transforms them. Every person who had entered became part of its consciousness, feeding the whispering, bending reality, expanding its power. And those lost in the depths? They were no longer lost. They were home. Sometimes I can still see intruders approaching, hear their fearful whispers. I am compelled to draw them in, to merge them into the forest's living entity. I warn you now, if you ever hear your name in the trees of the Pacific Northwest, don't follow it. Don't step off the trail, because the forest waits, and it never forgets. My name is Sarah, and this happened 2 years ago while camping in the forests near the Columbia River Gorge. I had gone with 2 close friends, eager for a weekend away from the city, tents packed and a cooler full of food. We wanted nature, laughter, and stories by the fire. But we found something far darker. The first night was peaceful. The river gurgled nearby, and the trees rustled in a gentle breeze. We set up camp, roasted marshmallows, and shared ghost stories. I remember glancing at the tree line and feeling a slight unease, as if the shadows were watching us. I laughed it off, blaming exhaustion. Around midnight, I woke to a strange silence. The usual night sounds of crickets and owls were gone. Even the river's murmurs seemed distant. My flashlight illuminated the campsite, and my stomach sank. One of my friends, Jake, was gone. Tent flaps flapped in the breeze, empty as though he had simply vanished. I shook the others awake. Panic spread fast. We called his name, flashlights slicing through the darkness, but there was no answer. A faint smell of wet earth and something metallic lingered in the air. Then we heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the dense forest around us, circling the campsite. And yet, no figure appeared, just whispers carried on the wind, repeating Jake's name, beckoning him away. We frantically searched the area, flashlights bouncing across thick undergrowth. My other friend, Mia, held my hand, trembling. The forest seemed unnaturally quiet now, as if it were holding its breath. Then I saw something strange near a cluster of cedar trees. A shadow, long and thin, slithering between the trunks, vanishing before I could focus on it. My stomach tightened. The whispers returned, louder, repeating Jake's name over and over, now accompanied by a faint laughter that sent chills down my spine. I tried to rationalize it. Could he have wandered off, fallen into the river? But instinct told me this was something else. Something that didn't belong in the natural world. The forest seemed alive, moving with intent, reshaping paths, hiding anything that could lead us to him. Hours passed. The fear grew unbearable. Then, something even worse happened. Mia screamed. I spun around and saw her pointing at a nearby tree. Carved into the bark, glowing faintly in the moonlight, were letters that spelled her name. Below it, next. I realized with horror that the forest wasn't random. It was selecting, watching, choosing who would disappear next. And we were trapped in its grasp. We tried to keep together, but the forest seemed to shift beneath our feet. Trails we had walked earlier now led to dead ends or twisted back toward the campsite. Every direction looked identical, and I could feel my panic rising. Then we heard it. Jake's voice. Faint, distorted, echoing through the trees, calling for help. I ran toward it, Mia grabbing my arm, warning me to stop, but I couldn't. The voice sounded real, human, but warped, impossible. As we entered a small clearing, the ground seemed softer, almost spongy. Shadows moved along the edges, thin and elongated, bending in ways that defied physics. I froze as I realized the figures weren't hiding. They were guiding us, herding us toward something. The whispers now merged with Jake's voice, repeating our names. My flashlight flickered, revealing shapes in the trees, faces pressed against the bark, screaming silently, eyes hollow. The forest wasn't just alive. It was hungry, and it had chosen. Suddenly, I noticed a path leading uphill, marked by rocks stacked unnaturally in a line. The whispers urged us forward. Against my better judgment, we followed, drawn by a compulsion we couldn't resist. Each step felt heavier, like the forest itself was pressing on us. Then I saw it. A clearing at the top, shrouded in fog, with faint greenish light glowing through the trees. Something waited there. We approached the glowing clearing cautiously. The fog thickened, swirling around our feet, and the green light pulsed like a heartbeat. My flashlight flickered, revealing shapes in the mist. Tall, thin, faceless figures, standing perfectly still, watching us. Mia clutched my arm, whispering that we should turn back, but something compelled me to move forward. The whispers were louder now, circling us from every direction, repeating our names, coaxing, threatening. I realized with growing terror that the forest wasn't just alive. It was conscious, aware of us, anticipating our every move. In the center of the clearing, a circle of stones glowed faintly. Jake's backpack lay in the middle, untouched, as if waiting. I stepped closer, my mind screaming that I was walking into danger. From the shadows, figures emerged slowly, their limbs bending in unnatural angles, bodies leaning and twisting impossibly, like something human yet grotesquely wrong. A low guttural hum emanated from the ground, vibrating through my bones. The figures didn't walk. They glided, closing the distance with deliberate patience. The whispers now sounded like chanting, a rhythm that resonated in my chest, making my heart race uncontrollably. Mia grabbed my hand, trembling. "We need to leave," she said. But before we could turn, one of the figures reached for the backpack. In an instant, it vanished. The fog thickened, and the whispers roared. Now, we ran, stumbling through the thick undergrowth, branches clawing at our clothes. Every step felt heavier, as if the forest itself resisted our escape. The whispers surrounded us, chanting our names, now distorted, overlapping, echoing from every direction. Suddenly, we reached a fallen log. I tripped and fell, hitting my head. When I looked up, Mia was gone. Panic surged through me. The whispers became screams. I called her name, but the forest swallowed it, twisting it back at me in mocking tones. Ahead, the path split into multiple trails, all looking identical. I tried to remember which way we had come, but the forest had changed. Trees that weren't there before now blocked our way. Shadows moved independently, dancing and flickering in my peripheral vision. A faint green light pulsed ahead. Against my instincts, I followed it, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't resist. The whispers merged into a single, commanding voice. "You belong here." I reached a small clearing. The fog swirled thickly, and I could see faint human shapes encased in moss and vines suspended from tree limbs. I recognized the shapes. They were campers. Missing people, frozen in time, trapped in the forest's twisted embrace. The realization hit me. The forest didn't just take people. It transformed them into part of itself, feeding on their fear and life. I backed away slowly, but the forest seemed to close in. The mist thickened, swirling around my legs, the whispers rising to a deafening crescendo. Shapes moved just beyond visibility. Faceless figures gliding silently, limbs bending impossibly, encircling me like predators. Then I saw it. A tree in the center, massive and gnarled, with carvings glowing bright green. From its roots, tendrils of shadow reached outward, snaking across the mossy ground toward me. Each step I took made them writhe closer. I stumbled over a root and fell face first into the damp earth. The whispers now spoke in unison. "Join us." My head throbbed. Panic consumed every thought. My flashlight flickered weakly, revealing hundreds of faint faces in the bark of the massive tree. They weren't carved. They were alive, their eyes following me, mouths open in silent screams. I tried to run, but every direction led me back to the glowing tree. The forest had become a labyrinth. Every shadow, every whisper, every movement pushed me toward it. Suddenly, a faceless figure emerged from the mist, long limbs stretching toward me. My mind screamed to fight, to resist, but my body froze as if rooted to the mossy ground. The forest's pulse matched my heartbeat, vibrating through my chest. I understood in that moment. The forest didn't just want me, it demanded me. I struggled against the force pressing me toward the massive tree. The shadows around me thickened, coiling like living smoke, their faceless figures stretching impossibly high, bending unnaturally to block any escape. The whispers had become a deafening roar inside my skull, repeating my name over and over, urging me to surrender. I stumbled forward, my body moving against my will, drawn like a magnet toward the glowing carvings. Every step felt like sinking into quicksand, every breath heavier than the last. The tendrils of shadow snaked along the ground, wrapping around my ankles, tugging me closer, binding me to the forest. Then I saw the campers, Jake, Mia, and others, suspended from the trees, frozen in mossy cocoons. Their eyes were open but empty, staring into nothingness. I realized the forest had already claimed them, absorbed them into its consciousness, and now it was claiming me. I screamed internally, trying to resist, but the forest pulsed, syncing with my heartbeat. The faceless figures closed in, hands extended, the whispers merged into one command: become part of us. A sudden gust of wind knocked me to the ground. The forest itself seemed to bend and shift, pressing its essence into me, filling my mind with whispers, visions, and an overwhelming sense of eternity. I understood. There was no escape. The forest didn't just trap, you became it. My mind screamed for release, but the whispers consumed my thoughts. The faceless figures hovered closer, their long limbs bending impossibly, merging with shadows stretching from the massive tree. The green glow illuminated dozens of ghostly faces embedded in the bark, all staring at me with hollow, accusing eyes. I tried to run, but the forest had shifted. The paths I thought I remembered no longer existed. Every step forward brought me back to the glowing tree. Every sound amplified the whispers, repeating my failures, mocking my fear. Suddenly, one tendril shot out from the tree, wrapping around my arm. Cold and alive, it slithered up my body, sinking into my skin. Pain and fear overwhelmed me as my vision blurred, the mist and shadows merging into one. I could feel the forest reaching into my mind, reshaping me, erasing my individuality. I caught glimpses of the other campers, their expressions frozen in terror as they became part of the forest's consciousness. Their voices now joined the whispers, echoing endlessly in my head. Panic surged through me. I tried to fight, kicking and screaming, but the tendrils pulled me closer to the glowing trunk. I could feel my essence splitting, merging, dissolving into the green light and shadows. The forest wasn't just claiming me, it was rewriting me, binding me into its eternal hunger. I fell to the mossy ground, the tendrils burrowing further into me. My thoughts fragmented, replaced with whispers, memories that weren't mine, visions of those lost before me. The faceless figures closed in, bending impossibly around me, their silent gaze pressing into my mind. I realized then that the forest was not just alive, it was sentient. It absorbed fear, pain, and life itself, consuming everything that entered. My scream became one with the whispers, my memories fusing with the green glow pulsing in the tree. A sudden flash revealed the campers, fully merged into the forest. Their limbs were twisted into roots and branches, their faces pressed into the bark, yet their eyes opened within the glowing tree itself. I knew what awaited me. I would become one of them, another voice in the whispers, another face in the bark. The forest pulsed with satisfaction, and the tendrils tightened. My body froze, my mind screaming silently as my essence began to dissolve. I could no longer distinguish myself from the shadows, from the whispers, from the glowing tree. The last thought I had was a desperate warning to anyone who might wander here. Don't listen, don't follow the whispers, the results. When consciousness returned, or what I could call consciousness, I was no longer fully human. My body and mind had merged with the forest. I could feel every whisper, every shadow, every pulse of the glowing trees. I was part of its eternal hunger now, a guardian and a warning for others who dared enter. Sometimes I see new intruders, lost and terrified, trying to find their way through the fog and twisted trees. I can sense their fear, their panic, and I know the forest will claim them. The whispers echo their names, calling, luring, until they too become one with us. I remember my friends, Jake and Mia, though their faces are now blurred among countless others embedded in the bark. Their voices join the chorus of the forest, repeating endlessly in my mind, warning others through fear and whispers. If you ever hear voices in the Pacific Northwest forests, names whispered through the trees, do not follow them. Do not stray from the trail. The forest waits. It watches, and it never forgets. I am part of it now, and one day, if you're not careful, you will be too. My name is David, and this happened during a solo hike near Mount Hood in Oregon. I was chasing photographs of the dense morning fog that blankets the forest in a ghostly light. Early autumn had brought the forest alive with reds and golds. But I had no idea the forest had other intentions. As I walked along a narrow trail, my breath visible in the chilly air, I noticed something strange. A faint, flickering light deep within the fog. At first, I assumed it was another hiker, perhaps with a lantern. I called out, but there was no reply. The light bobbed up and down, moving deeper into the dense woods, as if beckoning me. I hesitated, knowing the forest could be treacherous, but curiosity got the better of me. The fog thickened around my legs, muffling the sound of my footsteps. The light pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat. The trees seemed to lean inward, forming a tunnel toward the lantern. Shadows shifted unnaturally around me. Then I heard it. A whisper carried on the wind, soft but distinct. Follow. It will show you. Something in my gut told me this wasn't an ordinary light. I should have turned back, but the forest had already ensnared me in its subtle, silent trap. I followed the lantern deeper into the forest. The fog thickened with every step, obscuring the trail I'd come from. My heart pounded, and my camera, slung across my shoulder, felt heavy, like it was pulling me downward. The flickering light danced between the trees, always staying just out of reach. Every so often, I thought I caught a glimpse of a figure holding it. But when I turned, there was nothing. Just the fog and the twisted silhouettes of old pines. A strange sound began to accompany the lantern. A low, dragging shuffle, like something large moving through the underbrush. I froze, shining my flashlight in all directions, but found nothing. The forest seemed impossibly quiet, as if holding its breath. Then I saw it. Footprints in the damp soil, large and irregular, leading toward the lantern. But they didn't match any human pattern. They were elongated, clawed, and deep, pressing into the earth like the creature that made them weighed hundreds of pounds. The whispers returned, soft but insistent, echoing through the fog. Closer, closer. I realized, with a growing sense of dread, that the lantern wasn't just a light, it was a lure. I quickened my pace, trying to catch the lantern, but the trail seemed endless. Every tree looked the same, and the fog swallowed everything beyond a few feet. The whispers became clearer, almost human now, repeating my name in a slow, melodic cadence. Suddenly, I noticed shapes moving just beyond the fog. Tall, thin shadows, bending in impossible angles. I froze. One stepped forward, its limbs unnaturally long, fingers scraping the moss-covered ground. It tilted its head toward me. The lantern bobbed behind it, held aloft by nothing. No arms, no figure. Just the light floating, pulsing with intent. I turned to run, but the forest shifted beneath my feet. The trail twisted in ways that shouldn't exist. Trees seemed to move slightly, repositioning themselves, funneling me closer to the lantern. Panic surged. I stumbled into a small clearing, and the fog thickened to near blindness. The light hovered in the center, flickering green instead of yellow now, casting twisted shadows across the mossy ground. I heard low, guttural laughter echoing from all directions. My instincts screamed to leave, but my body felt rooted. It was as if the lantern and the fog were controlling my movements, guiding me into the unknown. I inched closer to the lantern, each step feeling heavier than the last. The fog swirled around my ankles like liquid, pulling me downward, disorienting me. The whispering voices grew louder, overlapping, repeating my name and strange words I couldn't understand. The shadows flitted just beyond the green light, stretching and twisting unnaturally. One shadow lunged briefly toward me, then vanished into the fog. I spun around, heart racing, but the trail I had followed had disappeared. The forest was no longer a familiar place. It had become a labyrinth. The lantern pulsed as if it had a heartbeat of its own, drawing me into the center of the clearing. My instincts screamed danger, yet I couldn't stop. Something ancient, intelligent, and malevolent guided it, and I was powerless against it. A sudden rustling from the trees caught my attention. From the fog emerged tall, thin figures, their limbs impossibly long, faces featureless. They moved silently, surrounding me, guiding me toward the lantern. Panic surged, but my body refused to turn away. The whispers intensified, forming a single commanding voice. "Step closer. Join us." I realized then that the lantern was more than a lure. It was a gateway, and whatever lay beyond would claim me forever. I took another step toward the lantern, the fog thickening until the world felt claustrophobic. The shadows bent and twisted in ways no human body could, their movements fluid and inhuman. Their silent presence pressed against my mind, making it difficult to think. Suddenly, the ground beneath me shifted. The mossy floor sank slightly, pulling me downward as if the forest itself were consuming me. The lantern floated higher, casting an eerie green glow over the tall trees, illuminating hundreds of hidden faces in the bark. Silent, watching, waiting. The whispering became clearer. It wasn't just voices. It was memories. Fragments of past hikers, campers, and lost souls, all absorbed into the forest. Their fear, their despair, their lives were now part of this living nightmare. I tried to run, but every path led me back to the lantern. My flashlight flickered weakly, revealing shadows moving faster than any human could. They reached out with impossibly long fingers, brushing the edges of my jacket. And then I saw it. A shallow pit near the center of the clearing, lined with green glowing roots. The lantern hovered above it, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. My instincts screamed to avoid it, but my feet moved forward automatically, as though drawn by an invisible hand. I peered into the pit. The green light illuminated hundreds of tangled roots, each writhing slightly as if alive. I realized the forest had absorbed those who followed the lantern before me, their bodies and souls entwined with the trees, feeding its consciousness. Suddenly, the lantern shot downward into the pit. A thin shadow lunged after it, disappearing into the green glow. The whispers screamed around me, urging me forward. Panic clawed at my mind, but I couldn't resist the pull. I took a step closer, then another, my body moving automatically. The shadows closed in, bending and twisting, circling me in perfect synchronicity. I could see faint, ghostly faces embedded in the roots, screaming silently. The forest pulsed like a heartbeat beneath my feet. Each pulse made me feel weaker, my mind fracturing, my sense of self dissolving. The lantern hovered just above the pit now, glowing brighter than before, as if calling to me. I wanted to run, to resist, but my body was no longer my own. The shadow's presence pressed against me, guiding me forward, bending my will to the forest's command. I realized with absolute terror that stepping into the lantern's glow would mean the end of me. Or rather, the end of who I once was. I stepped closer to the glowing pit, each movement feeling heavier, as though the forest itself pressed against my body. The shadows encircling me leaned inward, bending in unnatural angles, their faceless heads tilting as if studying me. The whispers merged into one command. "Step into the light. Join us forever." My heart raced, but my mind screamed for escape. I turned to run, only to find that the fog had shifted. The path back vanished entirely. The forest had closed in around me, walls of mist and twisting trees leaving no way out. The lantern pulsed brighter, casting a sickly green glow across the pit. The shadows extended their elongated limbs, brushing against me, urging me forward. I stumbled, nearly falling into the pit. From the writhing roots below, faint humanoid forms stirred. Lost hikers, campers, and wanderers, trapped, their faces pressed into the glowing mass. A cold dread gripped me, as I realized the forest wasn't just alive. It was a predator, patient and intelligent. It didn't merely trap souls, it consumed them, rewriting their essence into its living canopy. With trembling hands, I reached toward the lantern, feeling the pull in my chest, in my mind, stronger than anything I had ever known. I wanted to resist, but my will was slipping, my body moving of its own accord, guided by the forest's hunger. I teetered on the edge of the pit, staring into the writhing green light. My mind fractured under the whispers, memories not my own, voices from the lost souls, images of terror repeated endlessly. I realized the forest didn't just lure, it rewrote the mind, bending reality to feed its hunger. The shadows pressed closer, bending unnaturally, guiding me toward the lantern. My hands were trembling uncontrollably, yet they moved forward as if controlled by an invisible force. My heartbeat synced with the pulsing green glow. Then, a sudden gust of wind slammed into me. Breaking my focus, I stumbled backward, narrowly avoiding the pit. The shadows recoiled, almost hissing, and the whispers momentarily faltered. The lantern flickered, dimming slightly. For the first time, I saw a possible escape. The faint outline of a narrow path winding through the fog, partially hidden behind twisted trees. I hesitated, fear and desperation colliding. The shadows reoriented, their faceless heads tilting, sensing my hesitation. I understood. The forest was aware of my choice. It wanted me to step forward, to surrender entirely. Summoning the last of my will, I dashed toward the faint path, ignoring the tendrils of shadow reaching for me. Each step was agony, but I moved faster, guided only by the hope of escape. I ran blindly through the fog, branches clawing at my clothes, shadows stretching across my path. The whispers pursued me, echoing inside my skull, chanting my name, warning me, mocking me. Behind me, the green light of the lantern dimmed but lingered, pulsating like a heartbeat in the distance. The forest seemed to twist, pathways bending in impossible directions. Every step I took, the fog thickened, yet I kept moving, my mind frantically seeking the edge of the nightmare. I could feel the shadows skimming past me, close enough to brush my shoulders, but never quite catching me. Finally, I stumbled into a narrow trail, sunlight piercing the fog ahead. My legs pumped with renewed strength. The whispers faded, replaced by the natural sounds of the forest. Birds calling, leaves rustling, the distant river. I glanced back. The green light was gone. The shadows disappeared. The fog thinned, and the forest returned to its normal, serene self. But I knew what had nearly claimed me. I could still hear faint whispers echoing in my mind, a reminder that the forest never truly forgets. My hands shook and my chest burned, but I kept moving, vowing never to return. The lantern, the shadows, the whispers, they were still there, waiting for the next curious soul. I finally emerged from the forest, breathless, covered in dirt and sweat. The morning sun bathed the trees in gold, the mist dissipating like a memory fading. The serene beauty of the forest was a stark contrast to the terror I had just endured. I never spoke of the lantern to anyone. Friends, family, they would have dismissed it as imagination, exhaustion, or paranoia. But I knew the truth. Somewhere in the dense fog of the Pacific Northwest, the lantern waited, pulsing, whispering, drawing the curious and the unsuspecting into the forest's grip. Sometimes, I still dream of that green light, of the shadows bending impossibly, the writhing roots, and the voices of the lost souls. I wake in a cold sweat, heart pounding, hearing faint whispers in the quiet of my apartment. I know the forest never forgets. and it will always be waiting for the next wanderer foolish enough to follow the light. If you ever find yourself in the foggy forests of Oregon or the Pacific Northwest and see a flickering lantern, turn away immediately. Do not follow it. Do not speak. The forest does not forgive, and it does not forget. I survived, but I am forever changed. And somewhere in that fog, the lantern still burns. My name is Emma, and this happened during a backpacking trip along the Olympic National Forest in Washington. I had always loved solitude, the feeling of being surrounded by trees and silence, away from the chaos of city life. But that silence, it was different here. Heavy. Watching. On the second night, I set up camp in a small clearing near a creek. The sun had dipped behind the mountains, leaving the forest in twilight. I heard the usual sounds: leaves rustling, water trickling, a distant owl. But something felt off, like the forest had paused, holding its breath. Around midnight, I noticed movement in the shadows beyond my firelight. At first, I thought it was a deer or raccoon, but the figure didn't move naturally. It stood upright, impossibly still, blending perfectly with the tree trunks. Its presence was so unnerving that my chest tightened. I tried to dismiss it as a trick of the firelight, but the feeling of being watched intensified. Every crackle of the fire, every gust of wind seemed like it carried whispers just beyond my hearing. The figure didn't blink, didn't breathe, or maybe I couldn't perceive it. When I dared to focus, it was gone. But the sense of its eyes on me lingered, pricking at the edge of my fear. I realized with a cold dread that I might not be alone in the forest. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, that the isolation and shadows were playing tricks on my mind. I checked my camera and phone, no signal of course, and forced myself to settle back near the fire. Minutes later, the figure reappeared, closer this time. It still didn't move naturally, its body unnervingly rigid, limbs slightly elongated. Its face was featureless, or maybe hidden in shadow, but I could feel it staring at me. My pulse raced, my fingers trembling as I held my flashlight. I whispered my own name aloud, hoping it was another hiker playing a prank. But the forest remained silent, save for the creek's low gurgle. The figure didn't react, it just watched. And then, the trees around it began to creak unnaturally, shifting just slightly, as if the forest itself was bending to its presence. I tried to pack up quickly, but my hands fumbled. The figure didn't advance, didn't retreat. It merely observed, patient, eternal. Every instinct in me screamed to run, but my body felt heavy, paralyzed by the oppressive silence and unseen weight of its gaze. Hours seemed to pass. The moon emerged through the clouds, casting pale light, and the figure remained, a sentinel of something ancient and unknowable. I realized that leaving this forest might not be enough. I might carry its eyes with me forever. I forced myself to take a step back from the fire. The figure didn't flinch or move, but I felt its gaze follow me, pressing into my mind. The forest felt alive, every branch and leaf poised, waiting. Suddenly, a low, vibrating hum emanated from the trees themselves. It wasn't natural. No wind, no animal. The sound seemed to originate from the shadows, from the very soil beneath my feet. My chest tightened, and I stumbled, dropping my flashlight. In the brief moment of darkness, I thought I saw dozens of faint, shifting silhouettes emerging from the surrounding trees. They were featureless, like the watcher. Yet each radiated the same silent, predatory patience. My mind screamed that this was no ordinary forest, no ordinary creature. I scrambled to pick up my flashlight. The beam illuminated the watcher, closer now, standing between me and the edge of the clearing. My instincts screamed to run, but the forest had begun to shift subtly, redirecting paths, bending trails, making escape disorienting. Then I noticed something chilling. Faint footprints forming behind me. Not mine, but thin, long, clawed, and humanoid. They appeared out of nowhere, pressing into the soft soil as though marking my path, guiding me deeper into the darkness. The watcher tilted its head slightly, almost curiously. I realized with terror that I had become prey in a forest older than memory itself. I stumbled backward, heart pounding, the flashlight shaking in my grip. The watcher didn't move. It just tilted its head, silently observing, as if weighing my fear. The forest felt alive around me. Branches shifted, roots rose slightly from the ground, and the shadows seemed to lengthen and bend unnaturally. A sudden rustling came from behind the trees. I spun, shining the light, but saw nothing. Just the foggy outline of twisted trunks and thick undergrowth. And yet, the feeling of being observed intensified. Something in this forest had existed long before humans, patient, intelligent, and hungry for attention. Then, I heard faint whispers, soft, almost melodic, echoing between the trunks. At first, I thought they were the wind, but the words were unmistakable. Stay. Stay. My pulse quickened. The watcher shifted slightly, stepping into the beam of the flashlight. Its face, or the blank space where one should be, felt like it pierced straight into my soul. I knew I couldn't stay. I started packing frantically, my movements clumsy, driven by terror. But the forest had other plans. The trail I had followed to the clearing seemed to vanish, replaced by a new path lined with gnarled roots and shadows that leaned toward me. Every instinct screamed to run. But the watcher remained, patient and immovable, waiting for me to make the wrong move. I bolted toward what I thought was the trail. But the forest twisted around me. Trees shifted subtly, creating corridors I didn't recognize. Shadows flitted just beyond my sight, moving in ways no human could. I realized the watcher wasn't alone. Others were hidden, blending perfectly with the forest, silent sentinels observing every step. Branches clawed at my clothes, roots tripped my feet, and the whispers grew louder, now layered into dozens of voices calling my name. Each step was agony, my mind screaming to stop, yet my legs moved faster, propelled by pure terror. Suddenly, I stumbled into a small glade. Moonlight filtered weakly through the canopy, illuminating the watcher and several similar figures. They stood rigid, unmoving, as if part of the forest itself. The whispers became a single, commanding voice. You can't leave. Not yet. I froze. The figures began to move in unison, gliding silently toward me. Their elongated limbs bent impossibly as they advanced, edges of shadows stretching unnaturally. My flashlight flickered and died, leaving me in darkness, save for the pale moonlight reflecting off their forms. Panic surged. I realized with cold dread that the forest didn't just watch. It controlled the paths, bending reality to trap anyone who strayed too far. And now, I was its prey. I backed away, heart hammering, trying to retrace my steps. But the forest no longer obeyed the rules I knew. Every tree seemed to shift subtly, every root and branch guiding me deeper into the shadows. The watcher and its companions moved in perfect synchronization, keeping pace without a sound. The whispers intensified, layering over each other until it became a deafening chorus inside my mind. I stumbled into a thicket, tripping over hidden roots, my hands clawing at the mossy ground. The figures surrounded me, bending their limbs to peer down at me from impossible angles. Then, the watcher tilted its head slowly, and I noticed faint, ghostly faces appearing within its shadow. Lost hikers, campers, wanderers who had vanished in these woods. Their expressions twisted in silent terror, mouths open in screams I could feel more than hear. A strange compulsion gripped me. I wanted to scream, to run, to resist. But my body moved forward, drawn toward a faint glimmer beyond the trees. I realized that the forest wanted more than my attention. It wanted my presence, my life, my fear. The moonlight glinted off a narrow path, partially hidden behind twisted trees, faintly illuminated. This could be my escape, or a final trap. I didn't know which. But I had no choice. I sprinted toward the faintly illuminated path, branches whipping my face and roots clawing at my boots. The whispers followed me, overlapping and twisting into distorted pleas. Stay. Forever. Join us. My pulse thudded in my ears, adrenaline and fear pushing me forward. The watcher and its companions glided silently behind me, impossibly fast, yet eerily patient, never closing the distance too quickly. I glanced over my shoulder and saw their featureless faces tilting as if examining my every movement. The forest itself seemed to bend in their presence, roots shifting subtly to trip me, branches repositioning to block escape. Suddenly, a thick wall of fog surged ahead. I stumbled into it, gasping for breath. Shapes moved within, faint humanoid forms reaching toward me, merging with shadows and trees. I realized then that the forest wasn't just alive. It was a predator, patient, intelligent, and eternal. The moonlight broke through a gap in the canopy, illuminating a narrow trail beyond the fog. It was the only way out, the faintest promise of escape. I forced myself forward, ignoring the gnawing sensation that every step was being watched, measured, and judged. The whispers grew desperate now, echoing my own heartbeat, as though the forest knew I was close to leaving and it was losing control. The watcher tilted its head, silent but unmistakably aware of my escape attempt. I burst through the fog into the moonlit trail, gasping and trembling. For the first time in hours, I felt space, air, freedom, though the oppressive weight of the forest's presence lingered like a shadow at the edge of my mind. The watcher and its companions didn't follow immediately. They remained at the fog's edge, their featureless forms blending seamlessly with the mist. The whispers diminished but didn't vanish, lingering like a taunting echo. We're always here, waiting. I ran faster, my boots pounding the damp trail. Trees that had seemed twisted and alive now appeared normal. But I knew the forest had only allowed me a fragment of escape. Every instinct told me it would try again if I stopped, if I dared to rest. Hours later, I emerged onto a dirt road. The normal world felt alien. Silent cars, distant streetlights, ordinary houses. Yet I couldn't shake the sensation that eyes were still upon me, that somewhere in the Pacific Northwest forests, the watcher and its companions waited for the next lost soul. I glanced back one last time at the dark tree line. The fog shifted, and I swore I saw a featureless head tilt slightly, a subtle acknowledgement of my survival. But I knew the forest was patient. It doesn't forget, and it doesn't forgive. The days after my escape were unbearable. Sleep brought dreams of fog and shadows, of featureless faces watching, waiting, bending reality around me. Even in daylight, I felt the weight of their gaze, as if invisible eyes followed me wherever I went. I researched local disappearances in the Olympic National Forest. Stories of hikers vanishing without a trace, of whispers in the mist, of campers who claimed to see humanoid watchers. Everything aligned with what I experienced. The forest had existed long before humans, patient and eternal, collecting fear and curiosity like a predator collects prey. I avoided forests for months, but the memory persisted, gnawing at my sanity. Sometimes, I would catch faint glimpses of movement at the edge of my vision. Trees shifting unnaturally, shadows bending too perfectly. Each sighting sent a chill down my spine, reminding me that the watcher was never truly gone. The haunting truth settled in my mind. The forest waits, and it never forgets. Those who enter alone may not return, or if they do, they carry the watcher's gaze with them forever. I finally understood. Surviving the forest doesn't mean escaping it. Its presence lingers in memory, in shadow, in every whisper of wind through the trees. Years later, I returned to the Pacific Northwest, but only to its towns and roads, never its deep forests. Every time I hear fog rolling through the mountains, I remember the watcher, its featureless gaze, and the whispers that nearly consumed me. The silent watcher remains, waiting in patience beyond human understanding. I warn anyone who ventures into these forests. The trees may seem beautiful, the fog mystical, but don't be fooled. Something ancient and intelligent observes, calculating, waiting for the right moment. It doesn't chase. It waits. And if curiosity overcomes caution, you may never leave. Even now, I sometimes see shadows moving in corners of my vision, faint shapes that vanish when I look directly. I feel their presence in my dreams, in the whisper of wind through the trees near my home. The forest claimed what it could not fully devour: my fear, my memories, my constant vigilance. And I know it will continue claiming more, quietly, patiently, eternally. If you ever wander alone in the forests of the Pacific Northwest and sense eyes in the fog, turn around immediately. Don't follow the whispers. Don't stray from the trail. The watcher is patient, and it never forgets. The forests of the Pacific Northwest are beautiful, serene, and mysterious. But as we've seen tonight, they also hide shadows that linger far beyond the eye can see. From floating lanterns that lure wanderers into eternal fog, to featureless watchers silently observing from the darkness. These woods are alive with secrets, waiting patiently for the curious and the brave. Each story we shared tonight reminds us of one chilling truth. Sometimes, the forest is not just a collection of trees and wildlife. It is a predator, ancient and patient, bending the paths of reality and playing with fear itself. The lost hikers, campers, and wanderers in our tales were real in their terror, and their experiences serve as warnings to us all. If you ever find yourself in a foggy, remote forest, remember the tales we've told. Respect the shadows. Listen to the whispers of the wind. And above all, trust your instincts. Because not everything in the woods is meant to be seen or survived. Thank you for joining the Dark Fears family tonight. If you survived these stories, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new dive into the world of true horror. The forest waits, and the shadows are patient. But together, we can face the darkness.